In the noisy airport waiting hall, Richard Blackwood, a billionaire, sat quietly on a cold bench, his face marked by a loss that could not be named. Suddenly, a pair of twin children walked up to him and held out a small piece of cake with pure, innocent sincerity causing his heart to tremble. Before their brief conversation could fully sink in, their caregiver hurried over and led the two children away, leaving Richard behind with a strangely familiar aching feeling. When he stood up and left the airport, he had no idea that this very moment of kindness would pull him into a journey with no turning back, where blood, truth, and life itself would intersect in a fateful choice. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. Richard Blackwood sat motionless on the cold metal bench in Terminal C, staring at nothing. Around him, the airport pulsed with life announcements echoing overhead, the rumble of rolling luggage, children, crying couples embracing. He heard it all but felt none of it. His hands rested on his knees, fingers loose. His tailored suit hung perfectly on his frame, but the man inside it felt hollow, empty, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that mattered. He didn't know how long he'd been sitting there. An hour, time had stopped meaning anything. A woman hurried past, glancing at him with brief curiosity, probably wondering why a man in a $3,000 suit looked like he'd lost everything. She wouldn't understand. How could she? From the outside, Richard Blackwood had it all: the empire, the influence, the power that made politicians return his calls. But what did any of that matter now? He exhaled slowly, his chest aching with a weight that had nothing to do with his heart condition. The doctors had cleared him last month. Physically, he was fine. Emotionally, that was a different scan altogether. Why does that man look so sad? The voice was small, curious. Richard's eyes flickered, but he didn't turn. Maya, shh. Don't bother people. But Leah, look at him. He looks like he needs a hug. Richard finally glanced to his left. Two little girls stood about 10 feet away, identical twins with rich brown skin and hair twisted into puffs on either side of their heads. They couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. One of them, Maya, apparently was staring directly at him with large, concerned eyes. The other twin, Leah, tugged at her sister's sleeve. Miss Martha said, "We need to stay close. We can't just talk to strangers." But he's not a stranger. He's right there. Maya pointed at Richard with the blunt honesty only children possessed. Despite everything, Richard felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Almost a smile. Almost. He looked away, hoping they'd lose interest. They didn't. Small footsteps approached. Richard kept his gaze fixed on the departure board across the terminal, watching flights blink and update. Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, places that meant nothing to him anymore. "Excuse me, mister." Richard turned. Maya stood directly in front of him, now her sister hanging back uncertain. Up close, the child's eyes were even more striking, deep brown, bright with life and something else. Empathy. Real empathy. "Yes." His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into the small backpack hanging from her shoulders and pulled out a Ziploc bag. Inside were cookies, the kind you'd pack for a long trip, homemade by the look of them. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Richard blinked. "What? You look sad and hungry." "When I'm sad, cookies help." She held the bag out to him with both hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. Leah stepped forward, now still cautious, but curious. "Maya, those are for the plane." "We have enough," Maya insisted. She shook the bag gently toward Richard. "Please, you really look like you need one." Something inside Richard's chest cracked, not broke. He was already broken, but cracked like light finding its way through. He reached out slowly and took the bag. His hand looked massive compared to hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. Maya beamed. "See, you're already looking better." Richard opened the bag and took out a cookie. Chocolate chip. Still soft. He took a bite, and for a moment he tasted something other than the bitterness that had been coating his tongue for weeks. "It's good," he said. "Miss Martha made them," Leah offered, warming up now. "She makes them every time we travel. She says sweets make the world sweeter." Richard studied the two girls. Their clothes were clean, but worn clearly hand-me-downs. Their shoes were scuffed, but their faces glowed with something money couldn't buy. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. "Where are you two headed?" he asked. "New York," Maya exclaimed. "We've never been on a plane before. Miss Martha says we're going to see a special doctor." Leah nodded solemnly. A very special doctor, but we're not scared. No. Nope, Maya said, because we have each other and Miss Martha, and God watches over us. That's what our mommy used to say. Used to. Past tense. Richard caught it immediately. These children had already known loss. Your mother sounds wise, he said carefully. Maya, S smile softened. She was. She's in heaven now, with the angels. Leah reached for her sister's hand and Maya squeezed it. The gesture was so natural, so full of love that Richard had to look away. That's why we noticed you, Maya continued, tilting her head. You have the same look our mommy had sometimes, before she went to heaven. What look? Richard heard himself ask. Maya stepped close enough that Richard could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. She reached out and gently touched the back of his hand with her small fingers. My daddy told us something once, she said softly. He said, when angels are sad, the sky cries rain. Are you an angel who's sad, mister? The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He stared at this child, this impossibly perceptive child, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt seen. His throat tightened. He couldn't speak. Leah moved closer too, standing beside her sister. It's okay to be sad, she said gently. Miss Martha says sadness means you loved something real. That's nothing to be ashamed of. Richard's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain control. He was Richard Blackwood. He didn't break down in airports. He didn't let strangers' children see him vulnerable. But Maya and Leah weren't looking at him like he was Richard Blackwood, billionaire. They were looking at him like he was just a person, a hurting person who needed kindness. I lost someone too, Richard finally managed to say. His voice was barely above a whisper. Someone very important to me. Maya nodded seriously. That's why you're so sad. Yes. Did you love them a whole lot? More than anything, Leah reached into her own pocket and pulled out a small stuffed rabbit, well-loved and faded. When I'm really sad, I hold Mr. Hops. He helps. Do you want to hold him for a minute? Richard looked at the offered toy, this precious thing this child was willing to share with a stranger, and something inside him shattered completely. He reached out and took the rabbit, cradling it in his large hands. Thank you, he whispered. For a moment, the three of them existed in a bubble separate from the chaos of the airport. Two children and a broken man sharing a moment of pure human connection. Then a voice cut through. Maya, Leah, there you are. A woman in her late 50s rushed toward them, slightly out of breath. She wore comfortable travel clothes and had kind eyes creased with worry. She stopped short when she saw Richard holding the stuffed rabbit, the twins standing close to him. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, sir, she said, quickly reaching for the girls. I turned my back for 1 second. They're usually so good about staying close. Girls, you know better than to bother people. We weren't bothering him, Miss Martha, Maya protested. He was sad. We were helping. Richard carefully handed the rabbit back to Leah. It's all right, he said, his voice steadier now. They weren't bothering me at all. Quite the opposite. Martha looked between Richard and the twins, clearly trying to assess the situation. Her protective instincts were sharp. He could see that. Good. These children needed protecting. We gave him cookies, Leah explained, and Mr. Hops. And we told him about angels, Maya added. Martha, expression softened. She looked at Richard more carefully now, seeing what the girls had seen. I apologize if they were intrusive, Mr. Blackwood, Richard said automatically. Richard Blackwood, and truly they weren't. They were, he paused, searching for the right word, kind, very kind. A strange look crossed Martha's face when she heard his name, recognition, but it passed so quickly Richard couldn't be sure. Well, that's what we try to teach them, Martha said warmly. Kindness costs nothing but means everything. She checked her watch. Girls, we need to get to our gate. Our flight board's in 20 minutes. Okay, Miss Martha, the twins chorused. But Maya lingered, looking up at Richard with those impossibly wise eyes. Will you be okay, Mr. Angel? Richard felt his chest tighten again. I'll try. That's all we can do, she said solemnly. Then she smiled, bright and sudden as sunshine. Maybe you'll feel better soon, like you did with the cookie. Maybe I will. Martha gently guided the girls away, but both twins turned to wave at him. Richard raised his hand in return, watching as they disappeared into the crowd. He sat there long after they were gone, the taste of chocolate chip cookies still in his mouth, the warmth of a child's hand still ghost-like on his skin. And for the first time in months, Richard Blackwood felt something other than emptiness. He felt a pull, a connection, a strange, inexplicable sense that something profound had just happened, even if he couldn't name what it was. Those eyes, those bright, knowing eyes, he seen eyes like that before, long ago, in someone he'd loved and lost. Richard stood slowly, his legs stiff from sitting too long. He looked toward the gate where the twins had gone, now hidden by walls and distance. Who were those children, and why did looking at them feel like looking at a ghost? Richard didn't remember the drive home. One moment, he was standing in the airport watching two small figures vanish into the crowd. The next, he was pulling into his driveway, the gates of his estate closing behind him with a hollow clang. He sat in the car for a long moment, engine off hands, still gripping the steering wheel. The silence pressed against his ears. His housekeeper had left for the evening. The house would be empty, dark, good. He needed dark right now. Inside, Richard dropped his keys on the marble entryway table and headed straight for his office. Work. That's what he needed. Work had always been his answer to everything. Bury yourself in numbers and deals in the relentless machinery of building an empire. Leave no room for feelings. He powered up his computer and pulled up the quarterly reports. Revenue projections, market analysis, acquisition proposals. The words blurred together on the screen. Are you an angel who's sad, mister? Richard's fingers froze on the keyboard. He shook his head, trying to clear it. Focus. He had a board meeting in 3 days. He needed to review the Henderson merger, finalize the terms, prepare his presentation. Those eyes. Those impossibly bright, knowing eyes. Stop it, Richard muttered to himself, but he couldn't. The image of those two little girls kept surfacing in his mind like a photograph developing in solution. The way they'd looked at him, the way they'd touched his hand, that strange electric feeling of recognition. He stood abruptly, the chair rolling backward. Coffee. He needed coffee. In the kitchen, he went through the motions mechanically. Beans, grinder, water. The familiar ritual should have calmed him. It didn't. While the machine hissed and gurgled, Richard found himself staring out the window into his backyard. The pool lights cast blue ripples across the patio. Beyond that darkness, 7 years ago, someone else had stood in this kitchen with him, someone who'd laughed at his terrible jokes and burned toast and danced barefoot on these tiles. Elena. Richard closed his eyes, but that only made the memory sharper. He'd met her at a charity gala he'd been obligated to attend. She'd been working there not as a guest, but as part of the catering staff putting herself through graduate school. He'd noticed her immediately, not because of how she looked, though she'd been beautiful, but because of how she'd moved through the room. Purposeful, dignified, like she belonged anywhere she chose to be. They'd talked in the garden while she was on break. Just talked. And Richard had felt something he'd never felt before, like he'd found someone who saw him, not his last name or his bank account. He'd asked for her number. She'd hesitated, then given it to him. That should have been his first warning. But Richard Blackwood wasn't used to being denied anything, and he'd pursued Elena with the same intensity he brought to hostile takeovers. Except it hadn't felt like a conquest. It had felt like coming home. For 2 years, they'd built something real, something that made Richard believe in things he'd dismissed as naive partnership, understanding a future that didn't revolve around profit margins. Elena had challenged him, pushed him, made him want to be better than the cold, calculating businessman his father had molded him into. You're more than this empire, Richard, she'd said, once lying in his arms in this very house. You're more than your family's expectations. You're allowed to just be human. He'd kissed her then, believing her, believing that maybe he could have both the life he'd built and the life he wanted. He'd been wrong. The coffee machine beeped. Richard poured a cup, but didn't drink it. Instead, he found himself walking through the house, past the formal living room he never used, past the dining room that seated 20 up the stairs to the second floor. His bedroom door was closed. He hadn't been in there since Richard pushed the door open. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Bed made with military precision by his housekeeper. Curtains drawn. The room smelled faintly of the cedar chips in his closet. He crossed to the dresser and opened the bottom drawer. Beneath the sweaters he never wore, his fingers found what they were looking for. A small wooden box. Richard carried it to the bed and sat down heavily. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside lay the remnants of a life he'd tried to forget. A pressed flower from their first date, ticket stubs from a jazz concert, a photo booth strip showing the two of them laughing, Elena's head thrown back, Richard's eyes only on her. and beneath it all, a bracelet. Silver simple with a small charm in the shape of a star. He'd given it to Elena on their first anniversary. "So you can always find your way home," he'd said, feeling foolish and earnest all at once. She'd cried. Actually cried. Then she'd kissed him and whispered, "You're my home, Richard Blackwood. Don't you forget that." But she'd been the one who left. Richard picked up the bracelet, the metal cool against his palm. Elena had left it on his nightstand the night she'd disappeared. No note, no explanation, just the bracelet and an empty space where she'd been. He'd tried everything to find her, hired investigators, called in favors, searched for months. Nothing. Elena had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Eventually, he'd stopped looking. Not because he'd wanted to, but because his mother had sat him down and delivered a truth he hadn't wanted to hear. "She's gone, Richard. People like her, they don't belong in our world. She knew it. That's why she left. You need to move on." He'd told himself his mother was right. Elena had realized what he'd been too blind to see, that they came from different worlds, and love wasn't enough to bridge that gap. The family had made it clear from the start. When Richard had brought Elena home for dinner, the temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. His mother's smile had been ice. His father had barely acknowledged Elena's presence. "This is inappropriate, Richard," his mother had said later in private. "That woman is not suitable for this family. Think of the business. Think of your position." "I love her," Richard had said. "Love is a luxury people like us can't afford." The fights had escalated. His mother had threatened, manipulated, used every weapon in her considerable arsenal. And then one day, Elena was simply gone. Richard had suspected his mother had something to do with it. But Elena's things were gone. Her apartment cleared out, her phone disconnected. What was he supposed to think? That she'd been forced out, or that she'd chosen to leave? He'd never known for sure. And eventually the not knowing had calcified into acceptance. Until today, Richard looked down at the bracelet in his hand, then back at the photo strip. Elena's eyes stared up at him, frozen in time, sparkling with joy and life. And suddenly, he couldn't breathe. Those eyes, those eyes. He grabbed the photo, holding it closer to the lamp. Elena's eyes, that particular shade of brown with flecks of gold, the way they tilted slightly at the corners, the depth of expression in them. He'd seen those exact eyes this afternoon, in 2 little girls at the airport. "No," Richard whispered. "No, that's impossible." But his hands were shaking now, the bracelet slipping through his fingers onto the bed. The math started clicking into place in his mind, unbidden. 7 years since Elena left. The twins were 6, maybe 7 years old, which meant no. If Elena had been pregnant when she left, if those were her children, Richard stood abruptly, the photo clutched in his fist, his heart hammered against his ribs. This was crazy. This was coincidence. The world was full of brown-eyed children. Just because he'd had an emotional moment at an airport didn't mean "my daddy told us something once." That's what Maya had said. Their daddy. They had a father. Of course they did. And it wasn't him. Elena had clearly moved on, had a life, had children with someone else. But she'd never married. The investigator had been clear about that before Richard had called off the search. No marriage license, no partner anyone could find. Richard paced the room, his mind racing. The way those children had looked at him. The pull he'd felt. That instant, inexplicable connection. When angels are sad, the sky cries rain. Elena used to say something similar. She'd grown up in the South, told him stories about her grandmother, who'd filled her head with poetry and metaphors about heaven and earth. Richard stopped pacing. He looked down at the photo in his hand, then at the bracelet on the bed. "Elena," he whispered into the empty room. "What didn't you tell me?" The house offered no answer, just silence and shadows and the weight of 7 years of unanswered questions. Richard knew he wouldn't sleep tonight, knew that those 2 faces, those impossibly familiar faces, would haunt him until he had answers. But where did he even start? The woman at the airport, Martha. She'd said something about a special doctor. They were traveling for medical treatment, which meant there had to be records somewhere. Hospitals, charities, the Blackwood Foundation. They funded medical care for children. If those girls needed help. Richard was already moving back down the stairs to his office, powering up his computer again. This time he wasn't looking at quarterly reports. He was searching for 2 little girls with eyes like the woman he'd never stopped loving. And God help him, he needed to know why. Richard didn't sleep. By dawn, he'd compiled a list of every medical facility and children's home the Blackwood Foundation had funded in the past 5 years. The list was longer than he'd expected. His signature appeared on dozens of donation checks he barely remembered authorizing. At 7 sharp, his assistant Jennifer knocked on his office door, surprised to find him already there. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't expect you in so early. I need the full breakdown of our charitable disbursements," Richard said without looking up from his screen. "Specifically, anything involving children's medical care." Jennifer blinked. "All of them, that's going to be. All of them. I want names of facilities, amounts donated, and current status of each case we're funding. On my desk in 2 hours." "Yes, sir." She hesitated at the door. "Is everything all right?" "Just do it, Jennifer." She left quickly. Richard spent those 2 hours reviewing financial statements he'd never bothered to read closely before. The Blackwood Foundation had been his father's idea. Good for taxes, good for public image. Richard had maintained it out of obligation, writing checks at annual galas, shaking hands with donors, never really caring where the money went as long as it went somewhere respectable. Now he scrutinized every line item like it was a hostile acquisition. Jennifer returned exactly 2 hours later with a thick folder and her tablet. "The complete breakdown," she said, setting both on his desk. "I've flagged the urgent cases, those requiring immediate additional funding or facing critical situations." Richard opened the folder. His eyes scanned the pages rapidly, looking for anything that might connect to 2 7-year-old girls. "Walk me through the urgent cases," he said. Jennifer pulled up her tablet. "There are currently 8 facilities with critical funding needs, 3 hospitals, 4 community health centers, and 1 children's home, Hope Haven, located in Riverside. They've requested emergency funding for 2 patients who need specialized treatment at County Medical Center." Richard's hand stilled on the page. "Hope Haven, tell me about it." "It's a small facility, houses about 20 children. We've been funding them for 3 years, $50,000 annually. The director is Martha Williams. She's requesting an additional $150,000 for 2 children with a rare blood disorder. The cases are," Jennifer checked her notes, "twin girls age 7. The room tilted slightly. "Twin girls," Richard repeated. "Yes, sir. According to the medical reports, they need ongoing treatment and possibly transplant surgery. Without additional funding, the facility can't cover the cost." Richard stood. "Where's this place located?" "Riverside, about 40 minutes outside the city. But sir, we typically handle these approvals through—" "Cancel my meetings today." Jennifer looked up sharply. "All of them. You have the Henderson people at 2 and the board." "Cancel everything. Tell them I have a personal matter to attend to." "Mr. Blackwood, the Henderson deal is—" "Jennifer." Richard's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Cancel them. Reschedule for next week. This can't wait." She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, sir. Should I arrange a car?" "No. I'll drive myself." 20 minutes later, Richard was on the highway heading toward Riverside. He'd entered Hope Haven's address into his GPS without really thinking about what he'd say when he got there. What was he doing barging into a children's home because of a hunch? Because 2 little girls had kind eyes, but his hand stayed steady on the wheel, and he didn't turn around. The neighborhood changed as he drove. Pristine suburbs gave way to older buildings, chain-link fences, corner stores with barred windows. Not dangerous exactly, but worn down, forgotten. Hope Haven sat at the end of a quiet street lined with oak trees. The building was old 2 stories of faded brick with white trim that needed repainting. A small playground occupied the side yard, swings aslide a sandbox. Everything looked clean, but tired. Richard parked on the street and sat for a moment staring at the building. This was insane. What was he going to say? "Hello, I met 2 children at an airport yesterday, and I think they might be mine." But he got out of the car anyway. The front door was propped open with a wooden wedge. Inside, Richard heard children's voices, laughter, the sound of dishes clattering. The entryway was small and cheerful walls covered with children's artwork. A handmade sign read, "Welcome to Hope Haven, where every child finds home." "Can I help you?" A young woman in her 20s appeared from a side hallway, wiping her hands on her jeans. She looked at Richard's expensive suit with undisguised surprise. "I'm here to see Martha Williams," Richard said. "I'm Richard Blackwood from the—" "Oh, Mr. Blackwood." The woman's eyes went wide. "Oh my gosh, we weren't expecting you. Miss Martha's in the back with the children. Please come in. I'll get her." She disappeared down the hallway, calling for Martha. Richard stood in the entryway, feeling completely out of place. Through an open doorway to his right, he could see a common room where several children sat reading or playing board games. They glanced at him with curiosity, but no fear. "Mr. Blackwood," Martha appeared at the end of the hallway, wiping flour from her apron. Her expression was a mix of surprise and something else concerned maybe, or recognition. "Miss Williams," Richard said, "I apologize for showing up unannounced. I was reviewing our foundation's commitments and saw your request for additional funding. I wanted to see the facility in person." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Martha quote as eyebrows rose slightly. "In person, sir, we're honored, but you could have just called. We would have prepared. I prefer to see where the foundation's money goes," Richard said smoothly. "If that's not an inconvenience." "Of course not. Please follow me." Martha led him through the building, pointing out the dormitories, the small library, the kitchen where she'd been baking. She spoke warmly about each child, clearly knowing all their names and stories. The place was humble but immaculate, every corner showing signs of care despite limited resources. "We do our best with what we have," Martha said as they walked through a narrow hallway. "Your foundation's support has been vital. We couldn't operate without donors like you." "Tell me about the 2 children who need the specialized treatment," Richard said, keeping his voice neutral. Martha's expression clouded. "Maya and Leah. Twin sisters. They came to us 2 years ago after their mother passed. Beautiful girls, bright as anything, but they have a rare genetic blood disorder. It's manageable with regular treatment, but lately—" She trailed off. "Lately what?" "They're getting worse. They need more aggressive treatment, possibly transplants. The costs are astronomical. We've been fundraising, but—" Martha shook her head. "It's not enough." They'd reached a door leading to a small courtyard. Martha paused with her hand on the handle. "They're outside right now getting some fresh air. Mr. Blackwood, I should warn you, they're not doing well today. Seeing them might be difficult." Richard's chest tightened. "I understand." Martha opened the door. The courtyard was small but pleasant, with a garden along one side and a paved path circling the space. Several children played near the garden, but Richard's eyes went immediately to 2 figures sitting in the shade of a large oak tree. Maya and Leah, but not the vibrant, energetic children from the airport. Both girls sat in wheelchairs, blankets draped over their laps despite the warm morning. Their skin had an ashen undertone, their eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Leah held her stuffed rabbit loosely in her lap. Maya had her head resting against the chair back, staring up at the leaves. Richard felt like someone had punched him in the gut. "They had a treatment session yesterday," Martha said quietly. "It always takes a lot out of them. They'll be better in a day or 2, but—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Maya turned her head slightly and saw them standing in the doorway. Her face brightened with recognition, though the smile was weaker than Richard remembered. "Miss Martha, it's the Angel Man." She called out, her voice thin. Leah lifted her head, squinting toward them. "From the airport," Martha looked at Richard sharply. "You've met them?" "Yesterday," Richard said, unable to take his eyes off the girls. "At the airport. They shared their cookies with me." "That sounds like them," Martha said softly. "They have the biggest hearts of any children I've ever known." Maya was waving now, beckoning Richard over with weak but insistent gestures. "She wants you to come say hello," Martha said. Richard Quote's feet moved before his brain could catch up. He crossed the courtyard, aware of other children stopping their play to watch this stranger in the expensive suit approach the twins. Up close, the deterioration was even more apparent. Both girls were painfully thin, their cheekbones prominent, their arms like twigs beneath their sleeves. But their eyes, those eyes, were still bright, still full of that impossible warmth. "You came back," Maya said. "Are you feeling better?" Richard knelt down so he was at eye level with them. His throat felt tight. "I should be asking you that question." Leah shrugged slightly. "We're okay. Just tired. The medicine makes us sleepy." "But we're glad you're here," Maya added. "Did you come to visit us?" Richard glanced back at Martha, who stood near the door, watching intently. Then he looked back at the twins, at their faces, their eyes, the shape of their features. Elena's eyes, Elena's smile, Elena's stubborn tilt of the chin when she was trying to be brave. "Yes," Richard heard himself say, "I came to visit you." And in that moment, kneeling in the courtyard of a children's home he'd funded without ever bothering to visit, Richard Blackwood knew with absolute certainty that these were Elena's children, which meant they might be his children too. The world narrowed to just the three of them, two fragile little girls in wheelchairs and a man who'd just found something he hadn't known he'd lost. "Mr. Blackwood, could we talk in my office?" Martha's voice cut through the haze in Richard's mind. He was still kneeling in front of the twins, staring at faces that looked so much like someone he'd lost that it physically hurt. "Of course," Richard managed, standing slowly. His knees protested. He'd been crouching longer than he'd realized. "We'll be right back, girls," Martha said gently to Maya and Leah. "You two rest here in the shade." "Okay, Miss Martha," they chorused, though Maya's hand reached out briefly, her small fingers brushing Richard's sleeve. "Don't leave without saying goodbye," she said. "I won't," Richard promised. Martha's office was a cramped room off the main hallway, barely large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet. Papers covered every surface: medical bills, donation receipts, childcare schedules. She gestured for Richard to sit, then closed the door. "I need to be direct with you, Mr. Blackwood," Martha said, settling into her chair with a heavy sigh. "Maya and Leah don't have much time left without proper treatment. Maybe 6 months, maybe less." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. 6 months. "They have a rare genetic blood disorder called Fanconi anemia. It affects their bone marrow's ability to produce blood cells. Without a transplant, their bodies will eventually fail." Martha pulled a thick medical file from her desk drawer. "This is their complete history. I was going to send it with the funding request, but since you're here..." She slid the file across the desk. Richard opened it with trembling hands. Medical terminology jumped out at him: pancytopenia, chromosomal instability, progressive bone marrow failure. Pages of test results, treatment logs, doctor's notes spanning 2 years. "The treatments they're receiving now are just managing symptoms," Martha continued. "They need a bone marrow transplant. We've been searching the National Registry for a match, but nothing yet. The odds are..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "What are the odds?" Richard asked quietly. "For African American children, less than 30% chance of finding an unrelated match. And even if we found one, the cost of the procedure, the post-transplant care, the medications..." Martha rubbed her eyes tiredly. "We're talking close to $500,000, maybe more." Richard's mind was reeling. $500,000, a number that meant nothing to him personally. He could write that check right now without blinking. But for these children, for Martha, it was an impossible mountain. "Tell me about their mother," Richard said, his voice rough. Martha's expression softened with sadness. "Elena, beautiful woman, strong as iron, gentle as rain. She brought the girls to us 2 years ago when she got too sick to care for them anymore." "What was wrong with her?" "Same thing the girls have. Fanconi anemia is genetic, passed from parent to child. Elena had been managing it her whole life, but pregnancy and childbirth took a toll. By the time the girls were 5, she was already declining." Martha's eyes grew distant with memory. She fought so hard, worked 3 jobs while getting treatment, trying to keep the girls fed and housed, but the medical bills buried her. She lost her apartment, her car, everything. Richard felt sick. She had no one to help her. She said the girls' father didn't know about them, that she'd tried to reach him once, but... Martha shrugged. "I don't know the whole story. Elena was private about her past, but I could tell she'd loved someone deeply. She had this bracelet she never took off, used to touch it whenever she talked about the girl's father." "A bracelet." Richard's heart stopped. "What kind of bracelet?" "Silver with a little star charm. She wore it until the day she died. Said it reminded her that some people were worth loving, even if you lost them." Martha's voice was thick with emotion. "She made me promise to give it to the girls when they were old enough to understand. It's in the safe with her other things." The room spun. Richard gripped the edge of the desk. "Mr. Blackwood, are you all right?" "I need to see it," Richard said hoarsely. "The bracelet. I need to see it now." Martha looked confused, but stood. "If it's that important, give me a moment." She left the office. Richard sat frozen, his mind racing through calculations. 7 years since Elena disappeared. The twins were 7 years old. Elena had Fanconi anemia, which she'd passed to her daughters. She'd tried to reach him. His mother. His goddamn mother must have Martha returned carrying a small cardboard box. She set it on the desk and opened it carefully. Inside were a few precious items, a worn book of poetry, a faded photograph of a young woman who must have been Elena's mother, and a silver bracelet with a star charm. Richard reached for it with shaking hands. The metal was tarnished now, but he knew every curve of it. He'd picked it out himself at a small jewelry store in the city, had it engraved on the inside. He turned it over. The engraving was still there, faint but readable. To E, always your home. R. Oh God, Richard whispered. Mr. Blackwood. He looked up at Martha, tears streaming down his face. Elena Vane. That was her maiden name. Martha nodded slowly. Yes. How did you... What was her married name? Richard's voice was barely audible. Please, I need to know. Martha opened the file again, flipping to the first page. Her finger traced down to a line Richard hadn't noticed before. It says here, Elena Blackwood, previous name Vane. Martha's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Oh my God, I'm their father, Richard said. The words came out broken, shattered. Those are my daughters out there. Martha sat down heavily. She married you. No, I don't know why she used my name. We never... Richard couldn't finish the sentence. His mind was fragmenting, trying to process 7 years of lies and loss and wasted time. She tried to reach you, Martha said quietly. She told me once, right before she died. She said she'd written letters, made calls, but they never went through. She thought maybe you'd moved on, didn't want to be found. I never got any letters. Richard's hands clenched into fists. I searched for her. For months. But she'd disappeared completely. Someone must have intercepted them. Richard closed his eyes. His mother. It had to be. She'd threatened to destroy Elena to make sure she never contaminated the Blackwood legacy. And she'd succeeded. Elena raised those girls alone. Martha continued, her voice gaining strength. She worked herself to death trying to give them a good life. When she got too sick to work, she lost everything. She came to us because she had nowhere else to go. And she made me promise. Martha's voice broke. She made me promise to tell them their father was a good man who would have loved them if he'd known. That he was a hero who just got lost along the way. Richard put his head in his hands and wept. He wept for Elena, who died alone and afraid, fighting a battle she couldn't win. He wept for the 7 years he'd lost with his daughters. He wept for the lies that had stolen everything from him. Does anyone else know, he finally asked, about me being their father? No. Elena never told me who you were. I only knew the girl's father existed because of their birth certificates. Martha paused. I have copies in the file. Richard wiped his eyes and looked. There, on 2 official documents, clear as day, father's name. Richard Blackwood. Elena had put his name down, had claimed him as the father even when she thought he'd abandoned her. I need to help them, Richard said, his voice hardening with determination. Whatever they need. The transplant, the treatment, everything. Mr. Blackwood, the costs are... I don't care about the cost. Richard stood abruptly. Money is the least of what I owe them. I want them moved to the best hospital in the state. I want the top specialists. I want every option explored. That's very generous, but... They're my daughters, Miss Williams. Richard's voice cracked on the word daughters. My children. I've already failed them for 7 years. I won't fail them now. Martha studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll make the arrangements. But Mr. Blackwood, they don't know who you are. They think you're just a kind stranger. I know. When do you want to tell them? Richard looked down at the bracelet still clutched in his hand. The bracelet Elena had worn until her last breath. The bracelet that had been meant to lead her home to him. Not yet, he said quietly. First, I need to make sure they survive. Then I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them about their mother, about how much I loved her, about how sorry I am. He looked up at Martha. Can I see them again before I go? Of course. They walked back to the courtyard together. Maya and Leah were exactly where he'd left them, the afternoon sun filtering through the oak leaves above them. They looked so small, so fragile, so impossibly precious. Richard approached slowly, kneeling in front of them again. I have to go now, he said gently, but I'm going to make sure you get the help you need. Whatever it takes. Why? Leah asked, tilting her head. You don't even know us. Richard smiled through his tears. Maybe not yet, but I'm going to. Maya reached out and took his hand. Thank you, angel man. You're the angels, Richard whispered. Both of you. He squeezed Martha's shoulder and walked away before he broke down completely. But as he reached his car, he made himself a promise. He would save them. and then he would make someone pay for every moment they'd suffered. Richard didn't go home. He drove straight to Blackwood Industries headquarters, parked in his reserved space, and took the elevator to the 20th floor. The building was nearly empty at this hour. Most employees had left for the day. Good. He needed privacy for what came next. In his office, Richard locked the door and went straight to his computer. He pulled up the company's email server, accessed the administrative controls, and began searching. If Elena had tried to contact him through official channels, there would be a record somewhere. He started with his personal email account going back 7 years. Nothing from Elena. He checked his spam folder, his deleted items, his archived messages. Nothing. But that didn't mean the messages hadn't existed. Richard picked up his phone and called the head of IT security at home. Marcus Chen speaking. Marcus, it's Richard Blackwood. I need you in the office immediately. I don't care what you're doing. A pause. Sir, it's almost 9 o'clock. I'm aware of the time. This is urgent. I need a full audit of my email account going back 7 years. Every message that came in, every message that was filtered, blocked, or deleted before reaching my inbox. Everything. That's a massive undertaking, Mr. Blackwood. It could take days to. You have until morning. Bring your whole team if you need to. I'll authorize overtime pay bonuses, whatever it takes. But I need this done now. Marcus's tone shifted, sensing the gravity. Yes, sir. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Richard hung up and called Jennifer next. Mr. Blackwood. She sounded surprised. I thought you'd gone home. I need you to pull every piece of physical mail that's come through this office in the past 7 years. Letters, packages, everything addressed to me personally that went through the mailroom or reception. Sir, we don't keep records that far back. Most mail older than a year gets shredded. Then find out who handled my mail during that time. I want names. I want to know who had access to my correspondence and what happened to anything addressed to me from someone named Elena Vane or Elena Blackwood. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. This is about those twins, isn't it? Richard's jaw tightened. Just do it, Jennifer, tonight. Yes, sir. He made 3 more calls to his lawyer, to a private investigator he'd used for corporate espionage cases, and to the building's security office requesting surveillance footage from 7 years ago, knowing it was a long shot. Then he sat back and waited. Marcus arrived first with 2 members of his team. They set up laptops in Richard's conference room and got to work immediately running sophisticated recovery software through the company's backup servers. Jennifer showed up an hour later with a stack of personnel files. These are the people who worked reception and mailroom during the relevant time period, she said, spreading them on Richard's desk. Most have moved on to other companies, but I've got contact information for all of them. Richard scanned the names. One jumped out at him. Patricia Morrison. She was my mother's personal assistant. That's right. She handled overflow from your office to especially personal correspondence. Your mother insisted on it, said it would help keep things organized. Of course she did. Where is Patricia now? Retired, living in Florida according to her last address on file. Richard wrote down the information. Anyone else who had direct access to my mail? Just Patricia and your mother. Standard protocol was that anything marked personal went through them first for screening. Screening? What a pleasant word for censorship. Richard S phone buzzed. Marcus from the conference room. He walked in to find all 3 IT specialists staring at their screens with identical expressions of shock. What did you find? Richard demanded. Marcus turned his laptop around. Sir, you're going to want to see this. We recovered deleted emails from a filtered folder that was never synced to your main inbox. Someone created a hidden rule in your email system 7 years ago that automatically diverted any messages containing certain keywords to a folder that only administrative accounts could access. What keywords? Elena, Vane, pregnant, baby, children, hospital, help. Marcus scrolled through the list. Basically anything that would have alerted you to what was happening. Richard's blood went cold. Show me the messages. Marcus pulled up the recovered folder. 43 emails, all from Elena. The first was dated 7 years and 2 months ago, subject line. Richard, please read this. Richard clicked it open. Richard, I don't know if you'll get this. I've tried calling, but your number's changed. I came to your office, but they wouldn't let me pass security. I need to talk to you. It's important. Please, if you get this, call me. Elena. The next email was dated a week later. Richard, I'm pregnant. I know we didn't plan this, but it happened. I'm scared and I don't know what to do. Please respond. I need to know if you want to be part of this. Then another a month later. I went to your house today. Your mother answered. She told me you'd moved on, that you didn't want to hear from me. She said I was making things up to trap you. Richard, I'm not lying. I'm carrying your children. Twins. I just need to know if you care at all. Richard's hand shook as he scrolled through the messages. They chronicled Elena's entire pregnancy, her fear, her hope, her growing desperation as her messages went unanswered. The tone shifted after the twins were born. They're here, Maya and Leah. They're beautiful, Richard. They have your eyes. I attached a photo. I wish you could meet them. I wish you cared enough to try. There was an attachment. Richard clicked it. 2. Newborns wrapped in hospital blankets, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. Elena's hand was visible in the frame, her fingers touching their heads gently. Richard made a sound he didn't recognize, half sob, half roar of anguish. The messages continued. Over the years, they became more desperate. Elena writing about the diagnosis, about the girls getting sick, about losing her job because she had to take them to so many doctor appointments. Richard, I know you don't want anything to do with us. Your mother made that very clear. But please, if you ever cared about me at all, help us. The girls are dying. They need treatment we can't afford. I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for your daughters. That message was dated 3 years ago. The last email was from 2.5 years ago. This is the last time I'll contact you. I'm dying, Richard. The same disease the girls have. I probably have 6 months, maybe less. I just wanted you to know that I never stopped loving you. And I'm sorry I wasn't enough to make you fight for us. Take care of yourself. Elena. Richard stood abruptly, his chair crashing backward. Who had access to this folder? Marcus checked the logs. Only 2 accounts. The system administrator, that was Patricia Morrison at the time, and... He paused, his face going pale. And your mother's account, sir. She accessed this folder regularly. The last access was yesterday. Yesterday. His mother had been reading these emails for 7 years, watching Elena beg for help, watching her die. And she'd done nothing. No, worse than nothing. She'd actively hidden it. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed his mother's number. It rang 4 times before she answered. Richard, darling, it's rather late for a phone call. I need to see you. Now. It's past 10 o'clock. Can't this wait until... No, it can't. I'm coming over. He hung up before she could respond. Mr. Blackwood, Jennifer said carefully from the doorway, what do you want us to do with all this? Print everything. Every email, every log entry showing when my mother accessed them. I want a complete record. And then I'm going to make sure she can never hurt anyone again. 20 minutes later, Richard stood in the foyer of his mother's estate, a thick folder of printed emails clutched in his hand. His mother appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in an expensive silk robe, her expression mildly annoyed. Really, Richard, this is quite dramatic even for you. Where's father? Asleep. As I should be. What's this about? Richard climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately. When he reached the top, he shoved the folder against her chest. This is what it's about. His mother took the folder with a frown, opened it, and her face went carefully blank as she recognized the emails. I can explain. You intercepted them. All of them. For 7 years, you intercepted Elena's messages and hid them from me. I was protecting you. She was pregnant, Richard's voice echoed through the hall. She was carrying my children, and you kept it from me. Those children would have ruined everything we built, his mother said coldly, dropping all pretense. That woman was nothing. A nobody trying to trap you into a life of mediocrity. She was dying, and you let her. She made her choices. I made mine. I did what was best for this family. Richard stared at the woman who'd raised him and felt nothing but contempt. You destroyed my life. You killed the woman I loved. And you condemned my daughters to years of suffering. Your daughters! His mother laughed bitterly. Those mixed-race children are not your daughters. They're a mistake. A liability. Richard's hand shot out and gripped his mother's arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point. Don't you dare call them that. Those girls are mine. They have my blood, and I will spend every remaining day of my life making up for what you stole from us. His mother jerked her arm free. If you acknowledge them, you'll destroy the Blackwood name, everything your father and I built. I don't care. Richard's voice was quiet, now deadly calm. I don't care about the name. I don't care about the company. I don't care about any of it. You're being irrational. I'm being a father. Finally. Richard turned toward the stairs. Consider yourself cut off. From me, from the foundation, from everything. And if you ever try to contact my daughters, I will destroy you. Richard. He kept walking. You'll regret this. Richard stopped at the door and looked back at her. The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were 7 years ago. Elena knew. She tried to warn me. I should have listened. He walked out into the night air, leaving his mother standing alone in her gilded mansion, and his phone rang as he reached his car. Jennifer. Sir, I found something else. Patricia Morrison kept personal records. Actual letters that Elena sent by mail. She shredded most of them, but she kept copies. For insurance, apparently. Send them to my house. All of them. Richard drove home through empty streets, his mind crystal clear for the first time in years. He'd lost 7 years, but he wouldn't lose another day. Richard had arranged for Maya and Leah to be transferred to County Medical Center within 24 hours. He'd hired the best hematologist in the state, Dr. Sarah Chen, and assembled a team of specialists. Money made things happen fast, but not fast enough. He was in a meeting with Dr. Chen discussing treatment protocols when his phone rang. Martha's name flashed on the screen. Mr. Blackwood, it's Leah. Martha's voice was tight with panic. She collapsed an hour ago. They've rushed her to County Medical. You need to come now. Richard was out the door before she finished speaking. He made the 20-minute drive in 12, his car screeching into the hospital parking lot. He ran through the emergency entrance, not caring about the stares from people who recognized him. Martha met him outside the ICU, her face streaked with tears. What happened? Richard demanded. Internal bleeding. Her platelet count dropped catastrophically. They're trying to stabilize her, but... Martha's voice broke. They said she needs a transfusion immediately and possibly a bone marrow transplant within days, or she won't make it. Where's Maya? In the waiting room with one of the nurses. She's terrified, Richard. She keeps asking if her sister's going to die like their mother did. Richard felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. I need to see the doctor. Now! Dr. Chen appeared moments later, still in her surgical scrubs, looking exhausted. Mr. Blackwood, Leah's condition is critical. We've got her stabilized for now, but her bone marrow is failing faster than we anticipated. She needs a transplant immediately. What about the donor registry? We're searching, but finding a match for a child of mixed heritage. Dr. Chen shook her head. It could take months. She doesn't have months. She has days, maybe a week at most. Richard's mind raced. Test me. Dr. Chen blinked. I'm sorry. Test me for compatibility. Right now. Mr. Blackwood, the chances of you being a match are extremely slim, unless you're a close blood relative. I'm her father. The words hung in the air. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. Are you certain? Yes. Test me. If I'm compatible, we do the transplant immediately. Dr. Chen studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Come with me. In a small examination room, a nurse drew several vials of blood. Richard watched his blood fill the tubes, dark and red, and thought about how this same blood might be flowing through his daughter's veins. We'll run an HLA typing test, Dr. Chen explained. It checks for tissue compatibility. We'll also need to run a DNA test to confirm paternity. Standard protocol. How long? The DNA test will take about 48 hours. The HLA typing can be expedited. We should have preliminary results in 12 hours. That's too long. Leah doesn't have 12 hours. Mr. Blackwood, I understand your concern, but run both tests simultaneously. I'll pay for rush processing. I'll pay whatever it costs. Just do it faster. Dr. Chen nodded. I'll make it happen. Richard was escorted to a private waiting room. The hours crawled by. He couldn't sit still. He paced, checked his phone, obsessively drank terrible coffee from the vending machine. At some point, Martha brought Maya to see him. The little girl looked smaller than ever, her eyes red from crying. Is Leah going to die? She asked him directly with that same brutal honesty children possess. Richard knelt in front of her. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. Do you promise? He looked into her eyes, Elena's eyes, and made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. I promise. Maya wrapped her small arms around his neck and held on tight. Richard closed his eyes and held her back, feeling the fragile bird-bone delicacy of her body against his chest. 8 hours later, Dr. Chen found him still in the waiting room, Maya asleep on the couch beside him. We have preliminary results, she said quietly. Richard stood carefully, not wanting to wake Maya. And, you're a match. HLA compatibility is nearly perfect, 10 out of 10 antigens match. I've never seen compatibility this strong outside of identical twins. Richard exhaled slowly. So we can do the transplant? Yes. But Mr. Blackwood, I need to be clear about what this involves. Bone marrow donation is not a simple procedure. We'll need to harvest marrow from your pelvic bone using a large needle. You'll be under anesthesia, but recovery can be painful. There are risks: infection, bleeding reaction to anesthesia. I don't care about the risks. When can we do it? We can schedule for tomorrow morning if you're certain, but there's something else you should know. Dr. Chen paused. The DNA results came back too. Expedited processing, like you requested. Richard's heart hammered, and she handed him an envelope. You should read it yourself. Richard opened it with shaking hands. Medical jargon filled the page, but 3 lines stood out in bold: probability of paternity 99. 99% conclusion. Richard Blackwood is the biological father of Maya Blackwood and Leah Blackwood. Richard stared at the words until they blurred. He'd known intellectually, but seeing it in black and white, official, undeniable proof, shattered something inside him. He walked out of the waiting room, down the hallway, and into an empty stairwell. Then he sank to the floor, pressed the paper to his chest, and sobbed. These were his daughters, his children, his blood. Dot, and one of them was dying. Dot, he cried for Elena, who'd carried this burden alone. He cried for the 7 years he'd lost. He cried for Maya and Leah, who'd grown up without a father when he'd been alive and searching the whole time. When he finally had no tears left, Richard stood, wiped his face, and walked back to Dr. Chen's office with steel in his spine. Schedule the surgery, he said. Tomorrow morning, first thing. The surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. Richard arrived at 5, was prepped by 5:30. They'd explained the procedure. He'd be under general anesthesia while they extracted bone marrow from his pelvic bone using a large hollow needle. The marrow would then be processed and transplanted into Leah within hours. You understand, this is just the first step, Dr. Chen had warned. Even with a perfect match, there's risk of rejection infection complications. The next few weeks will be critical. I understand. Now Richard lay on a gurney dressed in a hospital gown, an IV in his arm. A nurse was checking his vitals while an anesthesiologist prepared the equipment. Martha appeared in the doorway with Maya. The little girl looked terrified. She wanted to see you before. Martha trailed off. Richard held out his hand. Maya came to him immediately, climbing onto the step stool the nurse provided so she could see him properly. Are they going to hurt you? Maya asked, her voice small. A little, Richard admitted, but it's okay. It's so Leah can get better. Why are you doing this for us? We're nobody. Richard's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything, that he was her father, that he loved her, that he'd move heaven and earth for her and her sister. But the words stuck. Instead, he said, You're not nobody. You're everything. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, just like Elena used to do. Thank you, she whispered. Then Martha gently pulled her away, and the anesthesiologist approached with the mask. Count backward from 10, Mr. Blackwood. Richard looked at the ceiling. Somewhere in this building, Leah was being prepped to receive his marrow, his daughter, his flesh and blood. 10, he said. Elena, I'm so sorry. 9, I failed you. I failed them. 8, but I'm going to fix this. 7, I'm going to save them. 6, I'm going to be the father they deserve. 5, the world went soft and dark. When Richard woke, everything hurt. A deep bone-level ache that radiated from his pelvis through his entire body. He groaned, and immediately a nurse was there. Easy, Mr. Blackwood. The procedure went well. We harvested enough marrow for the transplant. Leah, his voice came out hoarse. She's in surgery now, receiving your marrow. Dr. Chen will update you as soon as she's out. Richard closed his eyes. The pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except those 2 little girls. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, Martha was shaking his shoulder gently. Richard, she's out of surgery. He forced his eyes open. How is she? Too early to tell if the transplant will take, but Dr. Chen says the procedure went perfectly. Now we wait. I want to see her. You need to rest. I want to see my daughter. The words came out fierce, undeniable. Martha's eyes widened slightly at the possessiveness in his tone, but she nodded. I'll ask Dr. Chen. An hour later, despite the pain, Richard was in a wheelchair being pushed toward Leah's room in the transplant unit. She lay in a sterile isolation chamber, tubes and monitors surrounding her tiny body, but her chest rose and fell steadily. Inside her, his bone marrow was beginning its work. His cells, his blood, his life flowing into hers. Dot. Richard pressed his hand against the glass, separating them. "Fight," he whispered. "Please, baby girl, fight." And somewhere in her medicated sleep, Leah's fingers twitched. Dot, like she'd heard him. Dot, like she was fighting. 3 weeks after the transplant, Leah opened her eyes and smiled. It was a weak smile, barely there, but it was real. Her body was accepting Richard's bone marrow. The cells were engrafting, multiplying, doing what they were supposed to do. Dr. Chen called it miraculous. Richard called it a second chance. Maya had barely left her sister's side during recovery. She'd sleep in the chair next to Leah's isolation chamber, talk to her through the glass press, her small hand against the barrier, like she could transfer her own strength through sheer will. Richard had been there too, every single day. He'd rearranged his entire life around hospital visiting hours, conducting business meetings from the hospital cafeteria, signing contracts on clipboard surfaces, barely sleeping. The day Leah was finally moved out of isolation and into a regular room, Richard knew it was time. Dot. He sat both girls down, Maya in a chair, Leah propped up in her hospital bed, still weak, but getting stronger every day. "There's something I need to tell you both," Richard began, his voice unsteady. "Something important." Maya tilted her head. "Are you sick too? Is that why you gave Leah your bone marrow?" "No, sweetheart, I'm fine." Richard took a deep breath. I'm your father." Silence. Both girls stared at him. "Our father," Leah repeated slowly. "But our father didn't want us. Mama said, your mother thought I didn't want you because I never responded to her letters. But I never got them. Someone hid them from me. I only found out about you a few weeks ago, and I've been searching for you ever since." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't know about us." "No, and I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have been there from the beginning." "But you're here now," Leah said quietly. Richard's vision blurred. "Yes, I'm here now, and I'm never leaving again." Maya climbed off her chair and walked to Richard slowly. She reached up and touched his face, studying him like she was seeing him for the first time. "You have our eyes," she said. "Mama always said we got our eyes from someone special." Richard pulled both girls into his arms, careful of Leah's IV lines, and held them while they cried together. 2 months later, Richard brought them home. The estate had been transformed. He'd hired designers to create spaces that felt warm, lived in, nothing like the cold museum his house had been. Maya and Leah each had their own bedroom, decorated in colors they'd chosen. Maya picked yellow and purple. Leah wanted blue and green. There was a playroom filled with books and toys, an art studio with supplies, a garden where they could play. Martha had agreed to move in temporarily to help with the transition. The girls needed someone familiar while they adjusted to their new life. Richard stood in the driveway as his car pulled up, watching Maya and Leah press their faces against the windows, eyes wide. "Is this where we're going to live?" Maya breathed. "If you want to," Richard said. "This is your home now." They explored every room, running from space to space with more energy than they'd had in months. The treatment was working. They were healing, getting stronger, but not everything was easy. The first challenge came 3 days after they moved in, when Richard enrolled them in the prestigious elementary school 2 miles from the estate. He'd pulled strings to get them accepted mid-year. He should have anticipated the reaction. On their 3rd day, Maya came home crying. Leah was silent, withdrawn. "What happened?" Richard demanded, kneeling in front of them. "Some kids said we don't belong there," Maya said through tears. "They said we're only there because you feel sorry for us. They called us names." Richard's blood went cold. "What names?" Maya shook her head. "Bad names. About our skin." Richard pulled them both close. "Listen to me. Those children are wrong. You belong anywhere you choose to be. You're smart, you're kind, you're strong, and you're mine. Nobody gets to make you feel less than that." But words weren't enough. The next morning, Richard walked both girls into school himself, past the stares of other parents, past the whispers. He found the principal's office. "Mr. Blackwood, we weren't expecting. My daughters were bullied yesterday. I want to know what you're going to do about it." The principal shifted uncomfortably. "Children can be thoughtless sometimes. I'm sure it was racism. Call it what it is. And if it happens again, I'll withdraw them from this school and make sure everyone knows why." Word spread fast. Richard Blackwood defending his black daughters against discrimination. By the end of the week, the bullying stopped. Not because hearts changed necessarily, but because people feared Richard's power. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. At home, Richard faced different challenges. Simple things he'd never thought about became complex. Like hair. One morning, Maya appeared in his bathroom doorway, holding a comb and looking frustrated. Miss Martha had to leave early for an appointment. "Can you help me with my hair?" Richard looked at the comb, then at Maya's thick, coiled hair, and realized he had absolutely no idea what to do. Yes, of course. Just tell me how." Maya giggled at his helplessness, but she was patient. She taught him about detangling spray, about starting from the ends, and working up, about being gentle. It took 45 minutes and several YouTube tutorials, but eventually Richard managed to put her hair into 2 puffs. "They're a little lopsided," Maya said, checking the mirror. "They're perfect," Richard insisted. She hugged him. "Thanks, Dad." Dad. The word made his chest ache in the best way. He started learning everything he could. He read books about black hair care, bought the right products, watched videos until he could French braid and twist and style. He learned about the cultural significance of hair, about the history, about why it mattered. Leah taught him about their mother's favorite foods, collard greens and cornbread sweet potato pie, red beans and rice. Richard hired a cook who knew how to make these dishes properly, but he also learned to cook them himself, standing in the kitchen with a recipe book, determined to connect with his daughters through the culture they'd inherited from Elena. He found Elena's family too. Her mother had passed years ago, but she had cousins in the South who were overjoyed to learn about Maya and Leah. They sent photos, shared stories, helped Richard piece together the parts of Elena's life he'd never known. The girls video called their cousins every week, learning about their heritage, their roots. One evening, 3 months after they'd moved in, Richard found Maya in the library looking at a photo album Martha had saved from Elena's belongings. Pictures of Elena, pregnant Elena with newborn twins, Elena smiling despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Maya touched one photo reverently, Elena holding both babies, looking at the camera with fierce love. "I miss her so much," Maya whispered. Richard sat beside her. "Tell me about her." "She was strong. Even when she was sick, she never complained. She always made sure we knew we were loved." Maya traced her finger over Elena's face. "She talked about you sometimes." Richard's breath caught. "She did." "Yeah. She'd say you were a hero who got lost, that someday you'd find your way back to us." Maya looked up at Richard with those eyes, Elena's eyes, his eyes. She was right. Maya carefully removed a photo from the album, one of Elena laughing, her head thrown back, pure joy on her face. She held it out to Richard. "Mama said if we ever found you, we should give you this. She said you'd need to remember that she forgave you, that she never stopped loving you." Richard took the photo with shaking hands. He stared at Elena's face, at the woman he'd loved and lost, and somehow found again through their daughters. "She told us something else too," Maya said softly. "She said when we found you, we should tell you that you were always a good man. You just needed to remember how to be one." Richard pulled Maya into his arms and held her while he cried. For Elena, for the lost years, for the mercy of her forgiveness. "Your mother was wrong about one thing," he said finally. "What?" "I'm not a hero, but I'm trying to be the father you both deserve." Maya pulled back and looked at him seriously. "You already are. You saved Leah. You took us in. You're learning to do our hair." She smiled. "Heroes don't have to be perfect. They just have to show up." Leah appeared in the doorway, stronger now, color back in her cheeks. "What are you guys doing?" "Talking about Mama," Maya said. Leah came and sat on Richard's other side. "I had a dream about her last night." She was smiling. "She said she was proud of us." Richard put an arm around each girl, holding them close. "She should be," he said. "You're both extraordinary." They sat together in the fading light, 3 people learning to be a family, connected by blood and loss and the enduring power of a love that had survived everything. Outside, the sun set over the estate that was finally becoming a home. 6 months after the transplant, Dr. Chen declared both girls in full remission. Richard had never known relief could feel so physical, like a weight lifting from his chest, allowing him to breathe fully for the first time in months. He'd stood in Dr. Chen's office with Maya and Leah beside him, and when she'd said the words cancer-free, he'd dropped to his knees and thank God the universe, whatever force, had given him this second chance. Life changed after that, not just for the girls, but for Richard too. He'd always been a workaholic, measuring his worth in quarterly earnings and market share. Now he left the office at 3 every afternoon to pick up Maya and Leah from school. Board meetings got rescheduled around soccer practice. Conference calls happened from the sidelines of the playground. His business partners were baffled. His competitors whispered that Richard Blackwood had gone soft. Richard didn't care. On Friday evenings, instead of entertaining clients at expensive restaurants, he took his daughters to the observatory on the outskirts of town. They'd climb the stairs to the telescope deck, and Richard would point out constellations, teaching them the stories behind each one. "Mama loved stars," Maya said one night, her eye pressed to the telescope. "She used to tell us they were angels watching over us." "Your mother was right about a lot of things," Richard said softly. He'd learned everything he could about Elena's interests, her passions, the things she'd loved. She'd studied astronomy in college before dropping out to work. She'd dreamed of teaching children about the universe, so Richard taught their daughters for her. "That's Cassiopeia," he explained, adjusting the telescope for Leah. "The queen who was so proud of her beauty that the gods punished her. But your mother always said the real story was about a mother's love. Cassiopeia was willing to sacrifice everything to save her daughter." Leah pulled back from the telescope. "Like Mama did for us." "Yes, exactly like that." They spent hours there, bundled in jackets against the cool night air, mapping the stars Elena had once loved. Richard found peace in those moments, in the silence, in the wonder on his daughters' faces, in the connection to a woman he'd never stopped loving. But there was one more thing Richard needed to do. One final way to honor Elena's memory and ensure her struggle hadn't been in vain. 9 months after bringing the girls home, Richard stood before the Blackwood Foundation Board with a proposal that would redirect the entire focus of their charitable work. "I'm proposing we build a comprehensive medical center specifically for underserved children," he announced, projecting architectural renderings onto the screen. "Free treatment for rare blood disorders, genetic conditions, and childhood cancers. State-of-the-art facilities. The best doctors. No child turned away because of inability to pay." The board members exchanged glances. One spoke up. "Mr. Blackwood, the cost would be astronomical. We're talking hundreds of millions over." $500 million initial investment," Richard interrupted. "I'll personally fund the first 2 years of operation. After that, the foundation will sustain it through restructured giving priorities." "That's your entire personal fortune," another board member protested. "I'm aware. This seems personal." Richard smiled. "It is. Very personal. This center will be named the Elena Blackwood Medical Center, after the woman I loved and the mother of my children, after someone who died because she couldn't afford the care she deserved." He clicked to the next slide, a photo of Elena he'd found in her belongings, radiant and alive. "This is about making sure no other child suffers like my daughters did. No other parent dies alone and afraid because they can't pay for treatment. Money should never determine whether a child lives or dies." The board approved the project unanimously. Construction took 18 months. Richard was involved in every detail, from the color of the walls to the equipment in each room. He wanted it perfect, wanted it to be a place of hope, not fear. Maya and Leah helped design the children's wing, choosing bright colors and themes. They insisted on a reading room filled with books and a garden where patients could sit outside during treatment. "Mama would have loved this," Leah said, walking through the nearly completed facility. "She would have been proud of you both," Richard agreed. "This place exists because of what happened to her, because of you." The dedication ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in October, when the autumn leaves turned the surrounding trees into flames of orange and gold. Richard stood on the platform outside the medical center's main entrance, flanked by Maya and Leah. Both girls wore dresses they'd picked out themselves, Maya in yellow, Leah in blue. They'd grown so much in the past year, healthy and strong, their faces full of life. A crowd of hundreds had gathered. Doctors, nurses, families who would benefit from the center's services, reporters from every major news outlet. Richard had never felt comfortable with public speaking, but today the words came easily. 20 years ago, I built a business empire. He began, his voice steady. I measured success in profits and acquisitions. I thought money was power, and power was everything. He paused, looking down at his daughters. I was wrong. The real measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, it's what you give. It's not the empire you build, but the lives you touch. Richard gestured to the building behind him. This medical center bears the name of Elena Blackwood, a woman who showed me what real strength looks like. She raised 2 children alone while fighting a terminal illness. She worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. She never gave up, never stopped fighting, never stopped loving. His voice cracked slightly. Maya reached up and took his hand. Elena died because she couldn't afford the care that could have saved her. Because our system failed her. Because I failed her. Richard's eyes swept the crowd. This center exists to make sure that never happens again. Every child who walks through these doors will receive the best care modern medicine can provide, regardless of their family's ability to pay. He looked down at Maya and Leah, his heart so full it ached. Someone once asked me what my greatest legacy will be. I used to think it would be Blackwood Industries, the buildings with my name on them, the fortune I'd accumulated. Richard's voice grew stronger. But I was wrong about that too. My greatest legacy stands beside me right now, these 2 extraordinary girls. And my greatest achievement isn't building an empire, it's learning to be the father they deserve. He knelt down so he was eye level with his daughters. Maya, Leah, your mother gave me the most precious gift anyone could receive. She gave me you. And I promise to spend every remaining day of my life honoring her memory by being the man she believed I could be. The crowd erupted in applause. Richard stood and together with his daughters cut the ribbon stretching across the entrance. The Elena Blackwood Medical Center was open. That evening, as the sun began to set, Richard drove Maya and Leah to the beach an hour outside the city. It was the same beach where he and Elena had spent a weekend years ago before everything fell apart. They walked along the shoreline, shoes off, feet sinking into cool sand. The girls ran ahead, chasing waves, laughing as water splashed their legs. Richard watched them and felt something he hadn't felt in years, complete peace. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, the sun a fireball descending toward the horizon. Richard sat on the sand, and Maya and Leah came to sit beside him, one on each side. Look, Maya pointed, the first star, Venus bright and steady in the darkening sky. Make a wish, Leah said. What should I wish for? Richard asked. Whatever you want most, Maya said. Richard looked at his daughters, their faces glowing in the sunset light, their eyes bright with health and happiness. He thought about Elena, about the life they might have had together, about the years he'd lost. But he also thought about the life he had now, the family he'd found, the purpose that gave every day meaning. I don't need to wish for anything, he said quietly. I have everything I could ever want right here. The girls leaned against him, and Richard wrapped his arms around them. As the sun touched the horizon, a warm breeze swept across the beach. For just a moment, Richard could have sworn he smelled Elena's perfume, jasmine and vanilla. He looked up, and in the golden light of sunset, he thought he saw a figure standing near the water's edge, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile watching them with love. Elena. Richard blinked, and she was gone. But the feeling of her presence remained warm, protective, approving. She'd forgiven him. She was proud of the life he'd built with their daughters. She was finally at peace. And so was he. Dad, Maya's voice pulled him back. Are you okay? Richard looked down at his daughter, at both his daughters, and smiled. A real smile, full and genuine and free. I'm perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. They sat together as darkness fell, and stars emerged one by one, filling the sky with light. A family finally whole, a legacy of love that would outlast any empire.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.